have lost a couple of chiclets, but he earned a gold medal.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian DeFelice.
Welcome into episode 13 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, and thank you all for joining me. For the second time this week, USA Hockey captured Olympic gold by defeating Canada 2-1 in overtime. On Thursday, it was Megan Keller for the women's team, and on Sunday, Jack Hughes for the men's. Now, for both programs, the wins marked their third ever Olympic gold medal. For the women's team, 1998, 2018, and now 2026. And for the men's, 1960, 1980, of course, in Lake Placid, and now 2026 in Milano Cortina. For the women, it's their second gold medal in their last 3 Olympic Games. And for the men, it's their first gold medal, as I said, in 46 years since 1980, but it's also their first gold medal with NHL player participation. So as an American, full disclosure, the results of these games are incredible, outstanding. I'm so happy for USA Hockey. USA Hockey has come so far in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And the results of these games, hopefully, are another catalyst for the future of USA Hockey, just like 1980 was, just like 1996 was, and just like hopefully 2026 will be in terms of the long-term impact on the youth of American hockey. But I want to start off by giving my flowers to both Canadian programs, men and women. Starting off with the women, they entered their gold medal game against the Americans as huge underdogs. They had lost 7 or 8 consecutive head-to-head meetings against the Americans, including a lopsided loss in round-robin play at these Winter Olympic Games. And the Canadian women's team had the Americans on the brink of elimination, 1-0 late in regulation, and would have captured gold had it not been for a Hillary Knight redirection, and it would have been a massive upset, and there would have been joy and jubilation throughout Canada celebrating their women's team. And unfortunately for them, hockey is a game of inches, and it takes a full 60 to get the job done. But they were really spectacular in a losing effort. And of course, once the game goes to overtime, 3-on-3, like we saw with the men's, the game just kind of changes. And so Megan Keller gets the job done on a beautiful individual effort for the American women's team. But job well done, a hard-earned silver medal for the Canadian women's team, and they have nothing to hang their heads about. And for the American women's team, as I said, it's their third overall gold medal, their second in the last 3 Olympic Games, and you talk about inspiration for future generations of female and women's hockey, and the impact that team will have on women's hockey in the United States will be huge and massive. But with the men's game, listen, unlike the Canadian women's team, the Canadian men's team, they were not underdogs heading into their gold medal game with the Americans. They were, by most accounts, slight favorites, right? I mean, a lot of people will call it a coin toss. Some might say the Americans were favored. Some might say the Canadians were favored. I think probably the Canadians were favored. And so it was definitely gold or bust for the Canadian men's team. But you know what? They played their asses off, certainly in regulation, right? I mean, they were the better team throughout the majority of regulation. There's really no other way to describe that hockey game, right? I mean, they outshot the Americans nearly 2-1, and the speed and the skill of both teams was off the charts. But as we talked about in past episodes, both teams are very close, neck and neck. But the Canadians, they have Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar, Macklin Celebrini, but their speed and skill, it seems like it's at a different level sometimes. And I think you saw that throughout much of regulation, but the Americans obviously hung in there as well. I mean, these two teams have played head to head 3 times in the last calendar year, and the Americans have won twice, right? So they won 3-1 in Montreal in the prelims of the Four Nations face-off, and then of course they lost in overtime to the Canadians in the Four Nations face-off championship last February, a game that was right down the middle, dead even, and the Americans controlled play in overtime in that one as well. So these teams are razor thin. They're razor thin margin of difference between these two teams. But I will say, throughout much of regulation, the Canadians controlled a lot of the play. They were on their toes more so than the Americans. But unfortunately for the Canadians, hockey is a funny game, and if these two teams played 7 times, maybe the Americans would be on their toes 2 or 3 of the games against the Canadians, and that's how close they are. But you don't win games simply by generating, right? You have to go out there and execute. And Connor Hellebuck was without doubt the number one star of the game, and the best goalie throughout the entirety of the Olympic Games. And we'll get into the goaltending as well, because I thought Jordan Binnington was fantastic too throughout this game and throughout the tournament for the Canadians. But Connor Hellebuck had a lot of doubters and critics, especially in big game moments heading into these games. He's been on some really competitive Winnipeg Jets teams with a lot of Stanley Cup aspirations at times, and they've never gotten over playoff hurdles, and he's been at the forefront of that. And then, of course, last year at Four Nations, Jordan Binnington was the one who had the extra save. So Connor Hellebuck had a lot to prove, to maybe not to himself, but maybe to himself, but also to everybody watching. And he stole the game for the Americans. Not to take anything away from the Americans. Again, they played a good game too. Like defensively, they were structured and they checked well, and they were opportunistic, and they had their fair share of offensive chances too. But there's no doubt that Hellebuck was tested, more so than Binnington, certainly when it comes to grade A's. And, Connor was fantastic in this game. So, in terms of the Canadians, yeah, like they played a great game. And, you could easily make the case that, yeah, they were the better team throughout regulation. But as I was saying, you have to execute, and there is no coulda, shoulda, woulda in hockey. I mean, teams get outplayed all the time and find a way to win. Teams outplay their opponents all the time and find a way to lose. Like, hockey is not, it's about executing, right? It's not about if we did that or, we deserve this or we deserve that. No, there is no we deserve this or we earned that. It's did you win or did you not? And the Americans, they made that extra play, and so this game to me was just it was fantastic. It's something that the hockey world has been waiting for a long time, not just the last calendar year since the Four Nations face-off, but the decade prior. I mean, we hadn't had NHL players at the Olympics since 2014 in Sochi, and the Americans and the Canadians squared off in the semifinals that year, and the Canadians won, and they went on to win the gold. But you look back at that American roster, and it's the Patrick Kane was like one of one out there in terms of skill and speed. Like he was a unicorn on an American roster that didn't have much of what he had. And now you look at all the players in the NHL that emulate their games after Patrick Kane and their style of play after Patrick Kane. Don't get me wrong. There's only one Patrick Kane. And he was kind of a pioneer of how he played in terms of American-born players. But you can see in Clayton Keller, you can see in Jack Hughes, in Austin Matthews, the list really goes on. You can see how many American all-stars and Olympians model their game after Patrick Kane, who they probably idolized growing up. And Patrick Kane, ironically, did not make this Olympic roster, but his impact was very much felt because you can see how much he inspired. a lot of the players that are on this roster. But back to 2014, that American roster didn't have the speed and the skill that this roster had, and we've seen this coming over the last decade with USA Hockey. That 2016 World Cup of Hockey, that roster for the Americans was bare bones. It was a lot of aging veterans that, again, like, they had some, they were good players, but they weren't jumping off the page with speed and skill. And as an American fan, you saw players come into the league like a Jack Hughes and a Quinn Hughes and an Austin Matthews and a Jack Eichel, and you think to yourself, oh man, I want to see these guys in best on best. Like, USA Hockey is so much more fast and skilled than it's ever been. And of course, so is Hockey Canada. So, like, we wanted to see best on best for so long that this game today was more than just anticipation of the last few weeks or the last calendar year. It's been about a 10-year buildup of, let's see the new generation finally at best on best. And man, it didn't disappoint. The game was fantastic. The speed and the skill and the physicality was through the roof. Again, both teams just laying it all out there. Nothing but praise for both teams. I thought the officiating, for the most part, they kind of kept the nose out of it. Like, there were some obvious calls, some obvious high sticks where teams went on the power play, a couple of holding penalties where, nothing to complain about. They were kind of holds. Like every game, there's going to be a missed call here or there, but both teams had their chances on the power play, and both teams' penalty kill units came up huge. So then the game finally gets underway, and after a feeling out process, it's the Americans who draw first blood on what was a fantastic, one of the most impressive individual efforts I've really ever seen when you consider the skill it took to execute the play, when you consider the magnitude of the game that the play was made in, and when you factor in the defense pair that it happened on the ice against in Cale Makar and Devon Taves. Matt Boldy, with an incredible play to split the D and flip the puck to himself, bat it out of the air, and then come down on Devon Taves' stick to outmuscle him, and he finds the loose puck and has a beautiful forehand backhand finish on Jordan Binnington for the 1-0 lead for the Americans. And at this point in the game, the Americans were, I would say it was pretty back and forth, right? Like it didn't feel like one team had really taken major control of the flow of play. And this was a huge boost for the Americans. And in a game like this, if the Canadians were to get up in a game on the Americans, you just feel like, if they get the next goal, it's really over, right? So for the Americans to get the lead on the Canadians and now have them battling uphill to try to tie the game, you at least have a 2-goal cushion now, right? Like the Canadians have to score at least 2 on you. And so it was a fantastic finish from Matt Boldy, and he is just an unbelievable player. I talked earlier about the improvement in the speed and skill of U.S. hockey, and you see it at the World Junior level. USA Hockey had won back-to-back World Junior championships prior to this past tournament, and Matt Boldy is one of those young skilled players who is he's a top forward for the Minnesota Wild, along with Kirill Kaprizov. He's from the Boston area, went to Boston College, and just a very mature, polished two-way player. And I think a lot of people found out about him last year during the Four Nations face-off. You kind of you put together that first all-star USA roster in nearly a decade, and you see Matt Boldy's name on it. And Minnesota Wild fans know all too well how good of a player he is. But I think, for certain fan bases around the league to see Matt Boldy's name, they were probably like, Matt Boldy, I didn't realize he was that good. And, he's that good. So he is somebody that I'm going to be watching closely this spring for the Wild, who I think are poised to go on a really deep run. I know they're in a gauntlet of a division, with the Avalanche and the Stars, and one of those teams is going home early. But I think Matt Boldy is just a spectacular player, and he's nails. I mean, the the fire and the compete, and to be that type of gamer in this type of moment on the world stage with the best players out there, and to pull off a play like that takes some balls. So Matt Boldy is a player that his future is going to be very, very bright, and he'll continue to be a face for U.S. hockey. But he gets them off to the 1-0 lead, and I do think that the U.S. had a chance to extend their lead later in the first period with a power play, and they didn't do it. Austin Matthews had a wide open opportunity to shoot in front of the net on the power play, and elected to defer and pass it to Matthew Tkachuk, who was pretty well covered. I want to say maybe by Parayko. But you don't get many opportunities all alone like that, especially when you're a 60 plus goal scorer at the National Hockey League level. You like to see Matthews take that shot there. But nonetheless, you go into the first intermission up 1 goal. You can't help but feel like you're gonna need more of a cushion than 1-0, because if it stays 1-0, there's no insurance goal. You kind of feel like somehow, some way that the Canadians are going to find a way to tie the game. It might not be until the last minute of regulation, but you just know that they're going to find a way. And for the Canadians, they really started to tilt the ice in the second period, and they had a extended 5-on-3 opportunity to do so. And you kind of felt like with 1:45 of 5-on-3 time or thereabouts, that the Canadians were at least going to tie the game 1-1, if not score on the initial 5-on-3 and then have a chance to take a lead on the 5-on-4. But watching the game, you just felt like if the Canadians score on this power play, that the roof is going to explode, because it did appear to have more Canadian fans and American fans in attendance, and it felt kind of like a home game for the Canadian team. And if they found a way to score and tie that game, the roof was going to explode, and maybe they find a way to put on more pressure and get a lead heading into the third period. But for the Americans, credit to them, they were solid, really solid to kill off a Canadian 5-on-3, extended 5-on-3. That takes a lot of structure. It takes a lot of hockey IQ, getting in shooting lanes, getting your sticks in lanes, getting your body in lanes, taking options away, making certain seam passes seem less feasible, right? I mean, sometimes you see a wide open lane as a passer and you're licking your lips, but I felt like Jacob Slavin and Brock Faber in particular did a really good job of using their body to, go down to a knee or utilize their reaches and just kind of, finagle some passing lanes and deter the Canadian forwards from finding those seams. And you thought watching the game, okay, huge kill for the Americans. Maybe this is a swing of momentum, and now they might get on their toes and maybe they extend the lead here. But it never really happened that way. The Canadians just kind of kept the pressure on them through the second period, and Cale Makar eventually does tie the game on just what an unbelievable shot, right? A little bit of a pick play out high by I want to say it was Brandon Hagel on Matt Boldy, and Taves to Makar, D to D. Makar kind of walks right in with his elite skating and edge work, and just a perfect shot far side to beat Connor Hellebuck, and the game goes now 1-1, and the crowd's going crazy, as I said earlier, and now the Canadians, they're really feeling it. And the Americans were kind of saved by the buzzer. And so you go into the third period now tied 1-1. You were kind of hoping that the Americans would use that intermission to regroup, regather, and now your defense are closest to your bench. So now you're hoping in the third period that your D won't get trapped in their own end as easily, because you're not dealing with the long change. But man, it just didn't really help. The Canadians just kept the pressure on in the third period, and both teams had chances, but it was mainly in the USA zone. Felt like the Canadians were making more plays. I think that, the American defenders were, spending too much time defending to really get to their offensive game. I'm talking Quinn Hughes in particular. I'm talking Charlie McAvoy, Zach Werenski. It just felt like the Canadians were all over them, and so the easiest way to defend a team is to make them defend, right? The easiest way to take away Quinn Hughes' offensive ability is to make him defend down in his own zone. So I thought the Canadians did a good job of that. And then with about 6 minutes to go in the game, Sam Bennett takes a double minor high sticking penalty on Jack Hughes, which we'll get to that later, the effects of that on Hughes. But Hughes loses a couple of chiclets, and the Americans go to a power play for 4 minutes, or so we thought, with about 6 minutes to go in the game. And you're watching and you're saying, oh boy, I mean, Canada's kind of taking this game to them for a lot of it, but the Americans have a chance here with a deadly power play of their own to get the go-ahead goal with 5 minutes to go in this game, and you're that close to the gold medal. But I just felt like the Americans on their power play, they were a little lackadaisical. Felt like Austin Matthews and Jack Eichel in particular, I just kind of felt like they were, I don't know, they just felt like they were standing up too tall, or they just felt like they were too cool. They were too cool out there. They were stick handling and just chilling. And it's like, yeah, you don't always, passing seams don't just open for you. You kind of have to make them, create some havoc for the PK, get a couple shots on net and get the penalty killers moving around, get that box a bit on the move. And it just felt too stationary for my liking. And the second unit eventually went out there, and puck kind of hops over Jack Hughes' stick on the boards, and he reciprocates what Sam Bennett did to him, only this time I want to say on maybe Bo Horvat, and takes a minor high sticking penalty, which negates the rest of the Americans' power play, and even gives the Canadians a power play of their own with about a minute 10 to work with, as time was winding down in regulation. And the Canadian power play was a stark difference to the Americans, where they were zipping it around and getting grade A's, and you were just holding your breath as an American fan. And you couldn't help but feel like they had much more purpose and intensity to their power play with the game on the line than the Americans did. But needless to say, again, Connor Hellebuyck just came up huge with stop after stop, a couple of lucky breaks too. Nathan MacKinnon had a wide open net and missed it. Hellebuyck also had one of the greatest saves you'll ever see. Now, was it lucky? I don't know. I mean, you got to be good to be lucky. He made the effort to make the save, but Devon Taves all alone in the crease with a wide open net, and it wasn't even a situation of Taves fanning on it or not getting enough on the shot or putting it where he wanted to put it. He was putting it in the middle of the net, and with some mustard on it, and Connor Hellebuyck got his paddle on it. In a game of that magnitude, to make that save, unbelievable. My description isn't even doing it justice. You have to go watch it if you missed it. I'm assuming that if you saw the game, the save I'm talking about. It was just incredible. Those are the saves that make careers, right? If that goes in, the Canadians take the lead and probably win a gold medal. And nobody would have faulted Hellebuyck for not making that save either. It would not have been his fault. It would have been a player in the crease, just completely, or not in the crease, just outside the crease, with a wide open net and on a rebound. And he makes a save that he shouldn't have made. And, it's the stuff of legends there. So eventually the buzzer goes on regulation, and off to 3-on-3 overtime we go. And you just kind of felt like, the Canadians, both teams have so much speed and skill. But the Canadians roster, to me, just, again, I said it on past episodes, until proven otherwise, they're the gold standard. And to be the man, you have to beat the man. So it's not that I didn't think the Americans could win in overtime, but you just felt like all things created equally. I mean, they have McDavid, they have McKinnon, they have Makar. They have Celebrini. They have guys that can absolutely wheel. And, that Canadian roster just has so many players that have stepped up in big moments, right? Like Olympic goals, Four Nations goals in overtime, Stanley Cup final overtime goals, Game 7 Stanley Cup final game winning goals, right? Like Sam Reinhart, for example, he barely touched the ice, it felt like, in this game. And he had the game winning goal in Game 7 of the Cup Finals a couple years ago for the Panthers against the Oilers. Like, Brad Marchand is a clutch player for Canada. Sam Bennett, Conn Smythe winner, right? Like, Sidney Crosby, we haven't touched on yet. He obviously didn't play in this game, but Olympic overtime gold medal winning goal by Crosby. He's on that roster. Should he have been healthy? 3 Stanley Cups to his name, multiple gold medals. Like Connor McDavid, best player in the world. Nathan MacKinnon, Stanley Cup winner. Cale Makar, Stanley Cup winner. Like up and down the lineup, it's just there's so many clutch players that you just kind of felt like, hell, even Mitch Marner, who hasn't been that clutch at the NHL level, but he has an overtime winner in Four Nations against Sweden, sets up Connor McDavid for the Four Nations winner against the Americans last year, has a overtime winner in the Olympics this year against the Czechs. And so you just felt like they had that guy that in the past you've seen make that play. And for the Americans, yeah, they had Matthew Tkachuk, who has won back-to-back cups and has definitely had some moments of clutchness for the Panthers. And they have Jack Eichel, who's won a cup. But you hadn't yet seen it. None of these American players have really had that marquee moment yet. And so it's not that they couldn't, it's just that until you see it, it's tough to really predict it. But lo and behold, Jack Hughes, jackpot, right? Jack Hughes, he may have lost a couple of chiclets, but he earned a gold medal because in overtime, as 3-on-3 hockey happens, it goes back and forth. It's tight one-on-one, man-on-man coverage. And, eventually the seals kind of, crack a bit. And whether it's a line change or a bad bounce or, just somebody wins a race to a loose puck, transition happens quick in 3-on-3 overtime. And, I was, again, full disclosure, was cheering for the Americans. I'm trying to hide my bias when I'm having these conversations. But when I saw Connor McDavid coming down one-on-one on Jack Hughes, who's not a defenseman, Jack Hughes is a fantastic skater. He's one of the best skaters in the world. But he's not a defenseman. So Connor McDavid coming at him one-on-one when he's on his heels, Jack Hughes is a great skater when he's on his toes. So I just thought that McDavid was going to go around him and go to the net and maybe get that game winner, and he tried. To Jack Hughes' credit, he's going to be remembered for the goal. But to Jack Hughes' credit, he kept McDavid to the outside, and McDavid ran out of real estate. Next thing you know, there's a bit of a loose puck in the Americans' end, and Hughes wins the race to a 50-50 puck with Makar. Again, not a big deal. So not only does Jack Hughes get the game-winning goal down the other end, but he handles McDavid one-on-one, and he beats Cale Makar, who's, again, these are the top 2 players in the world. Connor McDavid, top forward in the world. Cale Makar, top defenseman in the world. No doubt about it. And, Hughes pokes the puck past Makar, creates a foot race with Werenski and Nathan MacKinnon. And, Werenski wins that race. He has some help from, trying to remember who was on the ice with him and Jack Hughes at the time. Was it Larkin? I'd have to go back and look. But was it Nelson? Brock Nelson? I don't remember. But anyway, Werenski gets the puck and finds Jack Hughes, who's trailing the play late, and he puts it past Jordan Binnington, who's been a huge big game goalie. Jordan Binnington has his struggles in the NHL regular season for sure, but he was nails in 2019 against the Bruins when the Blues beat them in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Again, you talk about the Canadians being the quote-unquote better team in this game and not finding a way to win. I mean, that 2019 Stanley Cup Final, the Bruins were the better team against the Blues in the first period. They blitzed them, right? But Binnington stood in his head. Next thing you know, it's 4-0 St. Louis, and they win a cup. who had more shots in the 2001 in Game 7 of the 2001 Cup Finals between Colorado and Detroit? I don't know. I can tell you Colorado won. I couldn't tell you who had more shots. Who had more shots in Game 7 of the 06 Finals between the Hurricanes and the Oilers? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Maybe it was Edmonton, but I can tell you who won, Carolina. How about Game 7 of the 03 Finals, Anaheim versus New Jersey? Did the Ducks have more shots? I don't know. Maybe not. But the Devils won. The 2009 Finals between Pittsburgh and Detroit. Who had more shots on goal that game, Pittsburgh or Detroit? I don't know. But I can tell you that the Penguins won, right? So, listen, my point is, yeah, it sucks for the Canadians that they outplayed the Americans for much of the game and had more shots and all that stuff. But who won the game, right? The Americans won, and that's all that matters. And but to my point about Binnington, he was incredible in 2019 against the Bruins in Game 7. He was incredible against the Americans in Four Nations Faceoff championship last year. So big game goalie. I thought he played well in this game for the Canadians too. He's not the reason that they lost. I mean, I'm sure people will overanalyze that goal by Jack Hughes, but I don't know. Like 5-hole, was it a top shelf shot? No. But it's as a goalie, it's tough to not have a bit of a 5-hole in that type of situation. And Hughes just kind of, found the soft spot, maybe like an inch or two off the ice. And I'm sure Binnington didn't love the goal. I'm sure Canadian fans don't love the goal. But I thought he was nails for Canada throughout the tournament, especially against the Czechs and, the Finns and whatnot, and certainly against the Americans at times. But, Jack Hughes, he a bloody smile on his face, and he lifts the Americans to their first gold medal win in 46 years since the Miracle on Ice team did it back in 1980. And it's just a fantastic, fantastic moment for USA Hockey. And, good for them. As I said, hopefully this inspires future generations and just keeps growing the game, right? I mean, you don't have any problems or worries about the game continuing to grow in Canada. They'll be just fine. They've won 9 Olympic gold medals. They've won, they had won 3 of the previous 5 Olympics with NHL player participation. Now it's 3 of the last 6. So they've won half the gold medals with NHL players involved. The Czechs won in 98. The Swedes won in 06. And now the Americans in 2026. So hockey's not going anywhere in Canada. They'll be right back at it, looking for revenge at the World Cup of Hockey in 2028. But as for the Canadian team, anytime a team loses is going to be second guesses, certainly with respect to roster construction. And, I'll say this, like with the Canadian team, I feel like 2 big omissions for Hockey Canada fans will be Matthew Schaefer and Connor Bedard. There are some others, I'm sure, like Mark Scheifele, maybe Wyatt Johnston. There's definitely probably a laundry list that diehard Canadians fans can probably list off more than just the ones that I mentioned. But, watching this team, again, they played so well in this game. Like, did the Canadians lose this game because Connor Bedard wasn't there? No. Did they lose this game because Matthew Schaefer wasn't there? I think Matthew Schaefer would have been a hell of a 3-on-3 option for the Canadians in this game. But the game ended pretty quick, and they lost with Makar, McDavid, and McKinnon on the ice. So it's tough to argue, that they lost with 3 of the best players in the world on the ice, that somebody else should have been out there at that moment. Obviously Sidney Crosby was a big loss, right? He's their captain heading in. He's one of the most decorated Canadians of all time. Obviously had the golden goal against the Americans back in 2010. Olympic champion also in 2014. And, he's been the face of hockey, for about 20 years now. So to lose him in the Czechia game, obviously was a difficult blow for the Canadians. And that's probably the one roster, omission from the gold medal game that you can look back at, but that's not a second guess. He's on the roster. He was just hurt. So, I think some of the guys that, missed due to injury, like, Braden Point, definitely a great player. I think he'd be good in a 3-on-3 situation too. Anthony Sorelli, good player, but like I don't think their gold chances hinged on Anthony Sorelli's availability. Tom Wilson was a guy that a lot of people probably questioned. I think a lot of people loved Tom Wilson's addition to the lineup, um, to the roster. I think there was probably some who maybe didn't love it. Maybe they thought there was a bit of redundancy with him and Sam Bennett. Obviously, Sam Bennett was an injury replacement, but Tom Wilson I thought was fantastic for the Canadians. I thought he brought everything that they wanted out of him. So he has nothing to hold his head down about. I think that Canadian fans should look back at Tom Wilson's tournament and say that he was an absolutely great addition to the team, both on and off the ice. Again, played a lot of big minutes with McDavid and Celebrini. Celebrini, right? Let's talk about him for a second. He was unbelievable. This kid is an absolute superstar. He's 19 years old. He's barely out of what should be high school, right? He was second in the Olympics in scoring behind Connor McDavid. He had 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points. He's absolutely lighting up the NHL this year with the San Jose Sharks. And the future is bright. The future is teal, as San Jose likes to market. And, Celebrini is going to be the face of Hockey Canada for a long time. You want to talk about McDavid being the face after Crosby. I think Celebrini is going to be the face after McDavid. I think he's already becoming one of the premier faces, even with McDavid still around and McKinnon and McCarr and all those guys. So, again, like I know Canadian fans are going to be upset. They're going to feel like they were the better team and but we all know that's hockey. Like, you got to find a way to win, right? Nobody likes excuses. And, these two teams have played head to head now 3 times in the last calendar year, and the U.S. has won twice, right? They beat the Canadians 3-1 in Montreal. They lost in Boston in the Four Nations face-off finals. And, this is kind of the rubber match, right? Like there are a lot of American fans last year who were annoyed at, Canadians fans prancing around bragging about winning the Four Nations championship when in reality, both teams were 1-1 against each other in a week stretch. But the Canadian fans said, well, this game meant more because it was a championship and we won. So, and they were right. Like both teams went into that game knowing it was the finals and they found a way to win, and hats off to them. Well, this time around, the Americans found a way to win. Hats off to them. So, the Americans have 7 goals for in their 3 games against the Canadians in the last year, and Canadians have 5 goals for. So these two teams are close. Like you can sit here and say, the Canadian, Canada should have won. Like we should have won. We're the better team. And listen, yeah, you were the better team. You were the better team throughout much of regulation, but you didn't win. And that's what the game is about. It's about winning and losing. Like that's what it comes down to. And Nathan McKinnon had a comment after the game that I didn't really like, to be honest with you guys. And he said, I don't know, he said something like you tell me who was the better team out there today. And you know what? I don't like that comment because you got to take accountability. Like, you lost, Nathan. Like, what do you mean? Who was the better team out there? Like, you better on the block long enough to know that, like, the close is not good enough. Like, you have to find a way to win, right? The Americans could say that they were the better team in the Four Nations Championship last year, especially in overtime. Who found a way to win? Connor McDavid, Team Canada. So, I know he's upset, frustrated, but it's the team. The Americans won gold. It was the biggest game, and they found a way to win. Did Canada get goalied? Yeah. Connor Hellebuck stood in his head. Last time I checked, goaltenders are part of the team, right? So you can't really fault the Americans for having great goaltending, and they found a way to win. And overtime was fair. Fair is fair in overtime. Like I don't think Hellebuck stood in his head in OT. I think that both teams had a couple of rushes, and the Americans won. Like I don't know, Nathan, you should have won the game in overtime when you were on the ice with Cale Makar and Connor McDavid against Jack Hughes and Zach Werenski. And again, I'm blanking on the third player for the U.S. at the time, but So, listen, if I'm a Hockey Canada fan right now, I'm not really second guessing the roster construction of this team. I think certain players, as happens in short tournaments, didn't really produce a ton. Like, you can go up and down their roster, and you can make the argument that it was pretty top heavy with the production, right? McDavid, Celebrini, McKinnon, Makar. Um, I think Mitch Marner was pretty quiet outside of his overtime winner against the Czechs, which again, huge moment, but pretty quiet otherwise. Mark Stone, pretty quiet otherwise. Sam Reinhart, pretty quiet. Horvat had some moments, but Seth Marchand, there were some guys that just, I don't know. Again, not everybody's going to put up 5 points in a short tournament. It's just not going to happen, especially with ice time being, delegated differently to each players. But I don't know. I think that Canada, especially the way that they played in the championship game, in the gold medal game, like we've covered it. They outplayed the Americans for much of the game. So you can't sit there and say that the roster wasn't good enough. And they obviously, as I said, they lost with their 3 best players on the ice and 3 of the best players in the world. Like, you can honestly make the case, very easy case, that Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, and Cale Makar are the 3 best players in the world. I think they are. I think most people know that they are. I think, you can make the argument for Kucherov and Draisaitl, and, the way Celebrini's playing right now, Celebrini. But you had the 3 best players in the world on the ice, and you lost. So anyway, it was a great game, great tournament. Both teams were, worthy of being in that game. Both teams were tested heavily throughout the Olympics at different times. Canada more so than the U.S. The U.S. were tested big time against Sweden. Drawing them in the quarterfinals was unfortunate, and especially having to play them in overtime. But with the NHL and the NHLPA having more World Cups of hockey on the horizon, starting in 2028, I believe, we're gonna get these teams again pretty soon. And I don't think, unlike the last time we saw these teams play before Four Nations. We saw U.S. Canada play in Sochi in 2014 and then Toronto in 2016, but then they didn't play again for 8 years, eight or 9 years. So you're talking about a generation of players, but that, it was a totally different. They were totally different rosters, right? My point is, going forward, these 2 teams are going to play again in 2 years, and the rosters are probably going to be, 85% the same, maybe 80%. So you're going to get some familiarity with these players becoming rivals. And listen, I think international best on best is cool. I think there's something cool about, guys who play hard against each other every single night at the NHL level, and they're the fiercest of rivals in the playoffs. Matthew Tkachuk, and he'll he'll go and try to take someone out in the playoffs, but he's hugging them right now with a gold medal around their neck. Like, these guys are all best friends. It's fierce competition when they're back at the NHL, but when they get a chance to play together on the international stage, it's really cool. And so I thought this tournament was fantastic. I think obviously it would have been cool if these games were in prime time in North America, but that's the Olympics. Like, how selfish are we to think that everything should be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? That's not the way the world works, and it's not the way the Olympics work. But with the World Cup of Hockey in 2028, those times will be catered towards North American fans for sure. And I very much look forward to it. And until then, the USA has bragging rights. So thank you all very much for listening, whether you're an American fan or a Canadian fan or a Finnish fan, a Swedish fan, Latvian, Denmark, Italy, France, Germany. Am I missing anybody who participated in this tournament? Hopefully you enjoyed the games and enjoyed rooting for your team. And lucky for us, the Olympics may be over, but the NHL is still very much underway. And we hit the ground running again with the NHL back in action on Wednesday and the Bruins back in action on Thursday against a team that's right behind them in the standings for the last playoff spot. So the Boston Bruins hit the ground running on Thursday against the Blue Jackets. So we will discuss that later on this week. Thank you all very much for listening.